Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer where we're going to completely unpack Part 4 of the Indian Constitution. We're looking at how the government tries to pull off this massive balancing act between protecting your individual rights and pushing forward a grand, sweeping vision of social welfare. It's a genuinely fascinating piece of the constitutional puzzle, and by the end of this, you'll see exactly why it forms the bedrock of how the entire state operates.
Okay, let's quickly map out our blueprint for today. We're hitting 1. The blueprint for welfare, 2. 3 pillars of policy, 3. Rights versus directives, 4. The legal tug-of-war, and finally, 5. The state's guiding light.
Before we get into the weeds, we have to talk about the ultimate destination. The entire goal of these directive principles of state policy, or DPSPs as we'll call them, is to build a true welfare state. Now, this isn't just about churning out random laws. The aim is to actually achieve substantial social, economic, and political equality. It's the government's positive obligation to make sure everyone has at least a baseline of economic security, decent living standards, and good health. I mean, that is an incredibly ambitious goal for any nation, right?
But right out of the gate, we run into this wild paradox. If you read the fine print of the Constitution, these principles are explicitly non-justiciable. That means you literally cannot take the government to court to force them to do any of this. Naturally, critics love to call them mere window dressings, or post-dated checks that you can never actually cash. So, why on earth are they even in the Constitution in the first place?
Well, let's dive into Section 1, the blueprint for welfare, and figure out what these rules actually demand.
The answer is actually hiding right here in Article 37. It says point blank that while, yes, a citizen can't sue the state to enforce these obligations, the principles themselves are, quote, fundamental in the governance of the country. It states really clearly that it's the duty of the state to apply these principles when they are making laws. So, okay, it's not a legal handcuff in the traditional sense, but it is a massive moral and constitutional imperative.
Dr. B.R. Ambedkar absolutely hit the nail on the head here. He famously called the DPSPs the best election manifesto of any political party. His whole point was that, sure, the government might not have to answer to a Supreme Court judge if they ignore these principles, but they absolutely have to answer to the ultimate court, the court of the people, when election time rolls around. You ignore the directives, you answer to the voters.
Which brings us to Section 2, 3 pillars of policy. How exactly are all these vast nation-building instructions organized?
You see, the framers didn't just copy-paste from one ideology. They mixed 3 completely different philosophical flavors to guide the country: Socialist principles, Gandhian principles, and Western liberal principles. Let's look at how each of these actually shapes the real world.
First up, the Socialist principles. These are all about socioeconomic equality and justice. You know those massive employment programs like MNRGA? That is a direct result of Article 41's mandate to secure the right to work. When you hear about laws guaranteeing maternity relief, that's Article 42 in action. And Article 39D pushes for equal pay for equal work for men and women. This entire pillar is about lifting up workers and leveling the economic playing field.
Next, we have the Gandhian principles. This is where you see a huge focus on grassroots empowerment and rural India. It gives us things like Article 40, which mandates organizing village panchayats for local self-government. It also pushes for cottage industries under Article 43. And there's even Article 47, which aims to prohibit intoxicating drinks and harmful drugs. It's very focused on community-level upliftment.
And finally, the Western liberal principles. This brings in broader, modernizing ideas like the heavily debated Uniform Civil Code under Article 44. It's also the foundation for things like Anganwadis and midday meals through Article 45's focus on early childhood care. Now, fun fact about Article 45, originally it covered free education up to age 14, but the 86th Amendment actually swooped in and elevated that specific part into a full-blown fundamental right. It just goes to show how these directives can evolve over time.
All right, Section 3, Rights versus Directives. Here is where things get really spicy. What happens when these broad state goals crash into individual rights?
You really need to grasp this core contrast. Think of fundamental rights as a massive do not cross sign for the government. They are negative obligations, enforceable boundaries protecting your individual liberty and ensuring political democracy. On the flip side, directive principles are basically a giant to-do list. They are non-enforceable, positive obligations pushing the government to actively do good stuff for the community to achieve socioeconomic justice.
If you look at these notes from our source material, you can really see the friction. Individual liberty on one side, community welfare on the other. It immediately begs the question: if a new law meant to distribute wealth fairly ends up trampling on someone's individual right to property or equality, who actually wins?
Well, that inherent tension triggered a massive legal battle, which brings us to Section 4, the legal tug-of-war.
This wasn't just a polite debate. It was an absolute roller coaster in the Supreme Court. In 1951, the court straight up said fundamental rights are superior, end of story. But by 1957, they introduced the doctrine of harmonization, basically saying, hey, let's try to make them work together. Then politics got involved. The 25th Amendment in 1971 gave a VIP pass to two specific directives, Articles 39B and C, which deal with wealth distribution, putting them above certain fundamental rights. And later, the 42nd Amendment wildly tried to make all directives superior to all fundamental rights. But the dust finally settled with a famous 1980 Minerva Mills case. The Supreme Court looked at that 42nd Amendment power grab, the attempt to make directives totally supreme, and they just struck it down. They declared that specific clause completely null and void.
And in doing so, the court came up with this brilliant, enduring metaphor. They ruled that the balance between Part 3, the rights, and Part 4, the directives, is literally part of the basic structure of the Constitution. They said they are the two wheels of the same chariot. You absolutely need both political democracy and socioeconomic justice to keep the country moving forward.
So, where does that leave us today? It's a very delicate, calculated compromise. As a general rule, fundamental rights still reign supreme. But those specific directives under Article 39B and C, the ones about distributing material resources for the common good and preventing wealth concentration, they keep their VIP pass. They have precedence over the fundamental rights of equality and freedom under Articles 14 and 19.
Let's wrap things up with Section 5, the state's guiding light, and see how this all plays out in the modern day.
So the directives are technically non-enforceable on their own, right? Well, the Supreme Court pulled off a bit of a legal magic trick to bridge that gap. They took Article 21, the fully enforceable right to life, and basically expanded it by absorbing the spirit of the directives. Thanks to various rulings, things like the right to earn a livelihood, live in a clean environment, and get equal pay for equal work have practically been read right into the right to life.
There's this one last metaphor from the source material that just perfectly sums up the whole shebang, and it totally changes how you view these rules.
The notes describe the directive principles as a lighthouse. They aren't iron chains holding the government back in court. They are a literal lighthouse, showing the ship of the state exactly which direction to travel. They illuminate the path through political and economic storms so the country can safely reach the ultimate destination of a true welfare state.
So here's what it all boils down to. We know these principles are, like Dr. Ambedkar said, the ultimate election manifesto for whoever is in power. The blueprint for a just, equitable society is literally already written into the Constitution for us. The real question is, if the ultimate court to enforce these rules is the court of the people during elections, are we actually using our votes to steer the ship toward that lighthouse? Think about that the next time you're looking at a political mandate. Thanks for hanging out with me for this explainer, and keep questioning the framework around you.